Item number 12, an exchange of views with the Commission and the EAS on the political situation in Serbia following the elections. We all know parliamentary elections in Serbia took place on the 17th of December, and we would now like to discuss how the situation has developed since then. I would like to welcome our two speakers, Mr. Marko Markovec, Deputy Managing Director for Europe in the European External Action Service, and Mr. Michael Miller, Head of Unit for Serbia and Montenegro in DG NEAR of the European Commission. Our Parliament was part of the International Election Observation Mission of the OSCE ODIHR to observe the early parliamentary elections in Serbia. 5 members of our committee were part of this delegation. Our colleague Klemen Groschel was chairing the EP Election Observation Delegation. In the plenary debate last week in Strasbourg, several members repeated the calls on the competent authorities to investigate properly all irregularities reported and to give follow-up to the recommendations of the Election Observation Mission. Tensions and protests continue since the elections, so now I would like to hear from our two guests. What is the EAS and the Commission's evaluation of the situation on the ground? How is the European Union going to support Serbia in addressing the issues and reforming the electoral process? And without further ado, I first give the floor to Mr. Markovec, then to Mr. Miller, both for 8 minutes each. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Honourable guests, thank you for giving us the opportunity to address Parliament on this very important issue. As it has already been mentioned, on Sunday the 17th of December, Serbia held early parliamentary elections and local elections in 65 municipalities, including in Belgrade. Those elections were observed by a very substantial international mission, which also included the members of the European Parliament. Now, according to the statement of the mission, parliamentary elections, though technically well administered and offering voters a choice of political alternatives, were dominated by the decisive involvement of the president, which together with the ruling party's systemic advantages created unjust conditions. You might have seen the statement from the 19th of December, HVP Borrell and the Commissioner Varhelyi, who took note of the report and concluded with concern that the electoral process requires tangible improvement and further reforms. They also expected all credible reports of irregularities to be followed up in a transparent manner by the competent national authorities. We are now awaiting the issuing of the final OSCE report and recommendations for future elections. Those would need to be implemented by the Serbia expeditiously and ahead of future elections. Serbia has already indicated they are willing to address all the recommendations by the OSCE and ODIHR and willing to work on that. Rule of law and proper functioning of Serbia democratic institutions remain at the core of the Serbia's EU accession process. On this, Serbia remains a candidate country negotiating its accession to the European Union. Therefore, we expect from them to demonstrate equivocally its determination to advance the accession process by accelerating its work on its implementation of EU accession-related reforms across the board and to deliver real and tangible results. This includes, in particular, the area of fundamental principles such as rule of law, democratic standards, freedom of media. It also entails normalization of relations with Kosovo through the swift implementation of all EU-facilitated dialogue commitments, including the agreement on the path of normalization and its implementation annex. This comes with responsibility for the regional stability, where accountability for the attacks that happened on the 24th of September in Banska are extremely important. As you know, in this particular geopolitical context, the EU has strong expectations that Serbia will step up its efforts towards full alignment with the EU common foreign and security policy, and also the restrictive measures. Serbia's CFSP non-alignment is a serious issue and has an impact on accession negotiations, which the member states are clearly expressed many times in the Council discussions. As mentioned, on the alignment, there are two things. First of all, we are calling on Serbia to, and we have strong expectations to align on CSFP instrument, but also on the restrictive measures regarding Russia, Iran, and others, but also to align with, but also to help or to intensify their work on sanctions circumvention. For the moment, the assessment is that Serbia maintains its close relations with Russia, including bilateral visits and frequent meetings of political leaders and Russian ambassador. Obviously, we continue to call on Serbia to increase its CFSP alignment, including on restrictive measures. Serbia engages constructively with us on the prevention of circumventions, and bilateral relations with China are also important and were marked by an intense agenda of visits before and after the Belt and Road Forum in October. The forum was intended by a large Serbian delegation led by President Vučić and resulted in 18 cooperation agreements signed, including the free trade agreement. Serbia has also been conducting active diplomatic efforts to step up its diplomatic engagement with countries worldwide, especially, but not exclusively, with partners from the non-aligned movement. We also have to mention that we continue to have a very good cooperation with Serbia in field of CSDP. Serbia contributes to our missions and operations in Somalia, Central African Republic, and EU now for Atalanta. Serbia will be deploying officer to join EUTM. Mozambique as well and continues to take part of the roster of EU battle groups and the EPF Balkan Medical Task Force measure. Very briefly, a few words on Belgrade-Pristina dialogue. In 2023, it has been a year of mixed developments in the process of normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia. In May and September 2023, we witnessed serious escalations, the attacks on KFOR soldiers in May and the violent attacks in Banjska on the 24th of September. However, we also saw significant progress in the dialogue. In February and March, with the agreement on the path of normalization and its annex, and at the end of last year, with important progress in several contested areas. Therefore, the 2023 ended on a, let's say, encouraging note as regards the dialogue. However, there remains significant and hard work ahead in 2024. Advancing the normalization process remains a requirement for the parties for progressing on their respective European paths. Therefore, implementation of the agreement on the path to normalization and its annex and of all the outstanding dialogue obligations with no further delay and without preconditions remain a key condition. Everyone should refrain from any provocative moves that could jeopardize the situation on the ground and should engage in their de-escalation. De-escalation remains a very important part in the normalization of the relations between the two, especially in the north of Kosovo, and the security issues are gaining its importance. And therefore, we need to be very careful on both sides and continue our engagement with Pristina and with Belgrade on how to better improve the security situation and how to better procure safety and security of all their citizens. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Markovets. And now I hand over to Mr. Miller, please.
Thank you, Chair. Honourable members, I want to thank you for the opportunity to share the Commission's perspective on the situation in Serbia following the 17th of December elections, which Mr. Markovets has mentioned were held at national, provincial and local levels, including, of course, in Belgrade. And this situation was tackled, of course, in the plenary debate of last week, but I would underline the key points for the European Commission which remain for us. First of all, the rule of law and the proper functioning of Serbia's democratic institutions are at the core of Serbia's EU accession process. And this is why we welcomed the International Election Observation Mission led by the OSCE ODIHR, which included a delegation from this House. According to the preliminary conclusions of the OSCE ODIHR mission, which I do not need to quote line by line. I think, although technically well administered and offering voters a choice of political alternatives, the elections were held in unjust conditions. The preliminary conclusions refer, for example, to allegations of irregularities, to media bias, and to a blurring of the distinction between state and party political roles. And on the basis of these findings, HRVP Borrell and Commissioner Verhey concluded in their joint statement of the 19th of December with concern that the electoral process requires tangible improvement and further reform. The statement stressed, in addition, our expectation that all credible reports of irregularities are followed up in a transparent manner by the competent national authorities, including those allegations related to the local elections in Belgrade and other municipalities which were not, formally speaking, part of the OSCE ODIHR election observer mission mandate. Finally, the joint statement called on the Serbian political leadership to ensure a constructive, inclusive dialogue across the political spectrum. Now, once the final OSCE ODIHR report is published, which is not yet, we wish to see Serbia implement the recommendations of that report, together with other previously made long-standing recommendations. We want this to be done quickly and in a transparent and inclusive process. We are, of course, closely following post-electoral developments, including the protests that have taken place in Serbia following the elections. We see these protests as overwhelmingly peaceful in nature. However, regrettably, we did see in December one protest escalating into violence. Now, freedom of assembly, the right to peaceful demonstration, freedom of expression are all fundamental rights which need to be protected. At the same time, violence is unacceptable. In all circumstances, of course, police action must be proportionate, and any measure of deprivation of liberty or criminal sanction related to these events must be both justified and proportionate. I do want to stress that an empowered civil society is a crucial component of any democratic system and should be recognised as such by state institutions. This was set out in our latest report in Serbia. It is not new. And I have this week, with this very point in mind, met with student activists who travelled to Brussels from Belgrade to share with us their views of the situation on the ground. And the EU delegation in Belgrade has, over the weekend, tweeted that pressure on civil society organisations, including those working on electoral matters, needs to stop. The authorities in Belgrade are aware of our readiness to support reforms and of our request for a clear commitment to follow up on our joint statement of the 19th of December. So we have the instruments to follow up once the OSCE ODIHR final report is adopted, and we intend to pursue that effort. Chair, honourable members, more generally on the EU accession process and our engagement with Serbia. So I want to make the point that it is 10 years since we have opened negotiations. 22 of the 35 negotiating chapters have been opened, but the last major step forward was in 2021. In our latest enlargement package report, which was adopted in November, we have repeated the European Commission's assessment that Cluster 3 of the negotiating chapters, which refers to competitiveness and inclusive growth, is technically ready for opening. Now, Serbia's non-alignment with the EU Common Foreign and Security Policy on sanctions in Russia remains a serious issue. Mr. Makovets has made exactly this same point. It does have an impact on the accession negotiations. At the same time, I want to stress that Serbia is cooperating with the EU to prevent sanctions circumvention. Belgrade has vocally supported the territorial integrity of Ukraine, and humanitarian assistance has been provided. Serbia also continues to actively participate and contribute to crisis management missions and operations. Again, I won't repeat the detail of what my colleague has mentioned this afternoon. We also need to see more commitment to take forward the process of normalisation of relations with Kosovo. This includes ensuring accountability for the violent attack against Kosovo police in September and against KFOR in May. But this being said, we are not at a standstill in the negotiations. I want to stress that in the course of 2023, there was a new dynamic when it came to accession negotiations with Serbia, and we saw increased readiness, willingness to address a number of issues of importance to the EU and therefore of importance to the country's accession perspective. Examples include Serbia's implementation of reforms in the area of rule of law, most notably when it came to the adoption of implementing legislation related to the constitutional amendment of 2022 on the independence of the judiciary. Serbia also prepared and adopted 2 new media laws, which have the potential to improve the overall situation, even if those laws were not finalised fully in line with the acquis and European standards. We are discussing with the authorities in Belgrade how to ensure full alignment as soon as possible. And in this context, which is also relevant for any debate on the holding of elections, we do expect that the media regulator in Serbia, the REM, fully delivers on its mandate, which it has not yet done. We also saw progress on EU visa policy alignment, but we are still expecting further efforts in this respect. But we are engaging with Serbia on addressing mixed migration flows, and we have seen good progress in that domain. In the area of energy, the adoption of the law on energy in June of last year was an important step towards unbundling. In December, we saw the official opening of the gas interconnector between Serbia and Bulgaria, and this will allow a shifting away from overdependence on Russia for gas, and Serbia must now also reduce its vulnerability to Russian ownership of key energy assets. In summary, the Commission's objective in 23, and it will remain in 24, will be to move ahead on files where progress can be achieved and to seek to create an atmosphere which is conducive to accession negotiations. We try to be pragmatic in this respect. Looking ahead, enlargement is, as you well know, back at the top of our agenda. The growth plan that the Commission has proposed offers economic convergence with the EU ahead of membership, a reinforced push on regional economic integration, and it will also thereby contribute to accelerating the accession process of all of our acceding countries in the Western Balkans. The invitation to Serbia to take part in the Rule of Law reports exercise as of 2024 was confirmed last week by the European Commission, and it will allow enhanced dialogue on the fundamentals, including the democratic criteria. Mr. Chairman, joining the EU is a choice. These developments on our side present an opportunity to Serbia both to advance accession negotiations and to accelerate its work on implementation of reforms across the board, and the European Commission stands ready to support Serbia's work in this respect. Thank you very much.
Thank you to both of you. We now come to the contributions by MEPs, and I first give the floor to Alessandra Moretti, who chairs the delegation to the EU-Serbia Stabilisation and Association Parliamentary Committee, for 2 minutes.
Grazie Presidente, grazie per le 2 relazioni. Io sono molto preoccupata, e credo che lo siamo tutti, per le notizie che ci arrivano dalla Serbia dopo le elezioni del 17 dicembre, da cui sono seguite tantissime proteste per possibili ed eventuali irregolarità in queste elezioni. Dagli osservatori internazionali, ricordiamo che c'erano anche colleghi presenti che si sono recati sul posto, giungono notizie preoccupanti. C'è stato riportato di pressioni sui dipendenti pubblici, di autobus per portare cittadini da tutto il paese e non solo a Belgrado. Chiaramente le elezioni sono state precedute anche da una campagna elettorale completamente sproporzionata nei tempi e nel rispetto nei confronti anche delle opposizioni, che non hanno avuto lo spazio necessario nemmeno sui media, quindi voglio dire Vučić che occupa i media e che non consente il confronto democratico. Ma attenzione, noi non vogliamo criticare solo la Serbia deve sapere che per noi è fondamentale il suo ingresso in Europa. Abbiamo bisogno della Serbia in Europa, ma non a tutte le condizioni. Sappiamo bene quanto costa all'Europa un'integrazione che non viene fatta nel rispetto dei valori su cui si fonda l'Europa. Quindi noi chiediamo un'indagine internazionale sopra le parti per fare chiarezza, un'indagine affidabile e trasparente. Da ultimo, è successo un caso molto grave, il mio Paese, oggi l'Italia, lo riporta tra le prime pagine di un quotidiano nazionale ai danni di Nikolav Sandulovic, leader del Partito Repubblicano, che è stato sequestrato, picchiato brutalmente da uomini in mimetica per 6 ore, minacciato di morte perché pare nel 2023 fosse andato a deporre una corona di fiori sulla tomba della figlia di un leader dei Kosovo Liberation Army. Questa persona, questo leader del Partito Repubblicano, ha subito 400 minacce di morte fino al sequestro del 3 gennaio per il suo impegno per la pace tra Kosovo e Serbia. Vi leggo solo e concludo il mio intervento di quello che gli è stato detto durante questo sequestro. Quando ricomincerà la guerra in Kosovo, perché ricomincerà la guerra in Kosovo, gli è stato detto, ti manderemo lì a farti ammazzare e violenteremo tua moglie e tua figlia.
Thank you, Signora Moretti. Now, Mr. Vladimir Bilčík, the Standing Rapporteur for Serbia, is not present, but Michael Gahler will read out his statement on his behalf.
Yes, thank you very much. And for the second round, I would like to ask for the floor for myself. Vlado apologizes for not being able here today, and I'm reading his statement. So it's him. As part of the election observation mission in Serbia, I would like to reiterate that while key procedures for voting and counting were mostly followed, several irregularities were observed. These include the misuse of administrative resources, the dominating media presence of certain figures, the use of harsh rhetoric, and the lack of proactive regulatory institutions to ensure informed voter choices. In light of these observations, I would like to emphasize the need for several comprehensive actions in addressing the challenges faced by Serbia's democratic process. Firstly, I stress the importance of a thorough investigation into all complaints related to the elections, including the recent request filed with the Constitutional Court to annul the December 17 Belgrade City Assembly elections by the official from the Serbia Against Violence coalition. Their concerns regarding voter migration, falsified signatures and phantom voters underscore the need for a comprehensive examination of the electoral process. It is crucial that these investigations are conducted with utmost transparency and efficiency, and that the findings are addressed promptly to maintain the credibility of the electoral process. At the same time, a clear distinction must be made between the parliamentary elections and the local ones, which we did not observe. Any issues with the local elections in Belgrade must be handled separately from the parliamentary ones. Secondly, Serbia requires institutional solutions to overcome its current problems. A properly functioning parliament and government, free from the constant cycle of campaigns and frequent snap elections, must be formed as soon as possible for the country to deliver on its EU reforms and to govern with a real agenda rather than campaign slogans. Stable and alive institutions are the cornerstone of a thriving democracy. Thirdly, the tensions within Serbia underline that the society is highly polarized. Recognizing the importance of freedom of speech, it is crucial to acknowledge that everyone has the right to express their views and participate in peaceful protests. A healthy democracy encourages open dialogue and respects diverse opinions, fostering an environment where citizens feel free to voice their concerns. It is, however, in the hands of Serbia to calm the situation in the country and prevent any further polarization of the society. Finally, I believe that we need a continued discussion and lessons learned from the final OSCE ODIHR report. This report, once available, will serve as a valuable and factual resource, offering insights and recommendations for improvements in Serbia's electoral processes. The European Parliament will closely monitor post-electoral developments in Serbia, and we are ready to support reforms that strengthen democracy and advance Serbia on the EU accession path. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Michael, for reading out Vladimir Bilčík's statement. Now we give the floor to the shadow rapporteurs or replacements from the groups. SND Demetris Papadakis is not present. Would another SND colleague like to jump in? Renew, Clement Groschel, the floor is yours for 1.5 minutes.
Thank you, Chair. So, the question we have on the table is very simple, and that's it. If accession country at the stage of negotiation that Serbia is at the moment, should we have this country a free and fair elections? So this is a very basic democratic issue we have at our discussion. And I think that those elections on the 17th of December were not meeting the basic criteria for free and fair elections. And our political decision now is how we will react to this. We can discuss about investigation, international, national, whoever it is, but we cannot imagine ourselves or pretend ourselves that the institutions which were actually perpetrating or helping these irregularities to take place, that they will do the proper investigation. That's a major issue. If someone is working at the ministry, issuing permits for going to the elections on local or even parliamentarian elections, we cannot expect him that he will do the proper investigation what went wrong, because he will be investigating himself. So this is a way that it's probably not helpful. The second issue is, of course, the media landscape. The media landscape, it is as it is. Some of us know how it works first-handedly, but this is not the major issue. The major issue is how to make conditions that the different political ideas will have the level playing field of competition. And the third are institutions which are not working, and watchdogs which are unable to work. These are the issues, and these are the political issues which the EU should address at a certain point. Or we can pretend that everything is good, that everything is normal, everything will stay as it is at the moment. At a certain point there will be a breakthrough, which will never happen on the Kosovo-Serbia relations, but still we can hope. We are hoping for 12 years and more. And we can hope for 12 years more, but I'm asking myself if the Serbian nation and if the Serbian society has the opportunity and the time available to wait for the next 12 years. Thank you.
Thank you, Clement. For the ID group, the shadow is Marco Zanni, but I think Jean-in Lacapelle wanted to take the floor. Please.
Monsieur le Président, chers collègues, il y a un mois, le peuple serbe, par un acte démocratique clair, a réaffirmé sa confiance envers le président Aleksandar Vučić. Je regrette cependant que des voix au sein du Parlement européen se soient opposées au résultat de ce scrutin, parfois, pourtant, incontestable. Je considère donc que le débat que nous avons eu en plénière la semaine dernière et qui visait clairement à soutenir l'opposition dans sa contestation du scrutin a surtout eu pour résultat de fragiliser la confiance démocratique. Ce débat qui n'a même pas attendu les conclusions des 5500 observateurs internationaux que vous évoquiez à l'instant, a prouvé qu'il est reposé non sur les faits mais sur une idéologie. L'élection du 17 décembre a donc clarifié la situation politique en Serbie. Mais aujourd'hui, c'est du Kosovo que vient l'agitation. En effet, en décidant d'imposer exclusivement l'euro, même dans les zones à majorité serbe qui utilisent le dinar serbe, le Kosovo exprime clairement son désir de perturber l'équilibre diplomatique dans les Balkans. Quoique sans légitimité, les Kosovars bénéficient de la complicité passive de l'Union européenne qui laisse se développer cette marginalisation des populations serbes désormais privées de ce lien économique entre elles et la Serbie. Je m'interroge donc, quelle est la position de la Commission européenne face à cette relance unilatérale de l'escalade des tensions? La stabilité des Balkans dépend du respect de la souveraineté des États et de la liberté des peuples, et l'Union européenne n'a pas à participer à la déstabilisation de cette région en pratiquant une ingérence, qu'elle soit politique, diplomatique ou monétaire. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. For the Greens, Viola von Kramon-Taubadel.
Thank you, Chair. I have been an election observer for almost 20 years. I've never seen something like this, what we have seen on the 17th of December. And to be honest, I was shocked by the statements of the AHVP and the Commission. I mean, that was rather a non-statement. But even here, you ask for a constructive, inclusive dialogue across the political spectrum. So what has the Commission, what has the ESS done so far to make this happen? Have you called on the leadership? Have you facilitated that? Have you been there on the ground? Have you set up a task force or anything? Because this level, this scale of fraud is really unacceptable for each and everyone, especially for the voters who voted not for SNE and who were actually expecting something else also from us. Then Mr. Miller has mentioned that there were some new dynamic in the accession, and he was mentioning the two media laws. They are on paper. They are on paper. You could have seen in the times of the election campaign how poorly the media access is working for the opposition candidate. There was almost no access on the national-wide media. So what do we do if we have an accession process, but those reforms, or you claim as reforms, do not work at all? And the third thing is, I think we should become more active. I think from the European Parliament there is an interest to be a facilitator between political groups in the country. It is in our interest to make sure that voters do not feel betrayed and that they get credibility and trust back in the EU institution. I would like to see something either coming from the External Action Service Commission or here from this House to take an active role in this. Thanks a lot.
Thank you. For the ECR, Mr. Krasnodębski is the shadow. He's not present. Is Mr. Morel from the left also not here? Then I give the floor to further colleagues. And the first one is for the EPP, Michael Gahler.
Thank you very much. Well, having listened to you, Mr. Markowitz and Mr. Miller, the issues that you addressed are in some ways still basic deficit state, basic issues that need to be addressed and in Serbia. And I think we are a quarter of a century after NATO had to push Serbia to let Kosovo go. So that was the last time that there was violence in the country, and since then the society and the policymakers could have embarked on a European path. So I'm definitely not happy with the state where we are. You referred a bit more in general terms that significant progress had been made in contested areas without going into details. Or on the other hand, you criticize pressure on civil society organizations who are dealing with the elections. I think that's also shows where we actually stand. My question goes also on the final report. I'm hearing issues that is there any interest? Do you see anything from the government side or from interested structures here to influence the content or to delay the publication? I want the report to come as soon as possible, and having been chief observer at multifold ways, I would resist any undue interference from outside. So where do we stand in this regard?
Thank you. Next is Tonino Pizzula.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Miller and Mr. Markowitz. The debate on AFET on elections in Serbia is, of course, important because it's about elections in a country that is candidate for European Union membership. Unfortunately, frequent parliamentary elections in Serbia weaken parliamentarian system as such and only serve to consolidate the autocratic rule of its president. Maintaining the stability of the Vučić regime means maintaining instability in some other countries in the Western Balkans, namely Bosnia and Herzegovina, Montenegro and Kosovo. I got a couple of questions for you. Has the Commission or EAS asked from the Serbian authorities an independent investigation into the allegations of electoral manipulation during the Serbian parliamentary and local elections? Does the Commission or EAS, depending on the findings of the investigation, would consider to call for repetition of the elections? Do you support the proposal drafting a list of recommendations building on the 26 recommendations made by ODIHR after the 2022 elections to ensure free, equal and secret elections, and conditioning the further EPA and future growth plan funding and progress in the accession process of the Serbia on the implementation of these recommendations before their next elections? And finally, did the Commission or EAS or EU delegation Belgrade react to the attacks by the Serbian authorities against international observers, MEPs included, in the aftermath of their elections. Thank you.
Thank you. Please, colleagues, now limit yourself to 1.5 minutes. And the next is Juliana Zovko.
All right, thank you very much. And regarding the elections, I will just say that we are waiting for this final report. But the main issue remains as a candidate country that has dealt, and it has such a big baggage to deal with, and that's discovering the missing persons from war that started and that they had implemented on in recent times, and on Croatia. We are expecting from Serbia as well to also apply these bilateral agreements and to include Croatian minority in Serbia into the government, as they have not secured the participation of the minorities. So this ignoring of this fact that Croatian minority is systematically enduring negation of their cultural and historical rights, it's something that is of great concern for us and for me especially, and this is something that you have to pay attention to, and I'm also expecting to see in this report that is coming out. Thank you.
Thank you. Next on my list is Thierry Mariani.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Ce débat ressemble à une nouvelle preuve de la politique du double standard de l'Union européenne. La Serbie a déjà subi la semaine dernière un débat pour moi un peu surréaliste en session plénière au Parlement européen, 1 mois et demi avant la publication du rapport définitif de l'ODIHR. Parce qu'en réalité, qu'est-ce que cette situation aujourd'hui a d'exceptionnel? Pour avoir 25 ans, quand j'étais député français, assister à des missions que ce soit du Conseil de l'Europe ou de l'OSCE, on est dans un processus tout à fait normal. Il y a un rapport préliminaire et il y a un rapport définitif qui est remis 2 mois après. Et en général, on attend quand même le rapport définitif. Or, j'ai vu le groupe Renew et la gauche qui étaient en pointe pour attaquer le président Vučić en arguant du rapport préliminaire paru le 18 décembre. Et que dit ce rapport? Que les votes se sont déroulés calmement avec des incidents isolés. C'est la page 3 du rapport. Que le scrutin organisé en seulement 1 mois et demi a été préparé correctement. C'est la page 2 du rapport. Que la Serbie a accueilli 475 observateurs internationaux et 5000 observateurs en général pour un scrutin où les libertés fondamentales ont été respectées. C'est la 5e ligne du rapport. Je crois qu'on est en train d'essayer de manipuler un scrutin sous les prétextes fallacieux sans aucun fondement à votre action. Nous attendons un alignement, c'est ce que disait M. Makovic. Écoutez, effectivement, c'est, je pense, le message adressé aux Serbes quand ils ne votent pas ce que souhaite l'Union européenne. Le vote est contesté.
Thank you. Next is Thijs Reuten.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you to our guests for being here. And I think that my colleague Rochelle asked the key question, what do we expect from a country that is a candidate country and that we all want to see as a member of our community of values, but not with unfair elections. The elections in Belgrade were stolen, according to independent observers, and the troubles of Serbian democracy go much deeper than just an election. And that is my main problem with how we as the European Union, but also collectively with the United States, are consistently reacting upon everything that happens in Serbia. We regard it as an incident. Everything that happens there is not an incident. I do not need the new report of OSCE ODIHR because I still have the report of 2022, the elections that I had the honor to observe, an uneven playing field favoring the incumbent. I think that also the positive developments that were mentioned today cannot be seen independent from what is happening in Serbia. The problems go much deeper into media capture, corruption, ties with organized crime, deeply connected with the captured state structures. So my question is, how long are we going to continue with our appeasement policy towards Serbia? Because I don't believe in it. But please, can you mention me one concrete, tangible result that was explicitly in favor of Serbia's path towards the EU and that benefited our relationship? Because the examples you gave, even the car plates in December, were instrumentalized to distract us from what happened after the 17th of December. So I really want to hear from you when we are going to change the policy towards Serbia in favor of Serbian people, in favor of the European Union.
Thank you. I have one more request to take the floor. That is our colleague Andor Deli. And I will close the speakers list now and then hand over to our guest speakers. First, it's Andor.
Thank you, Chair. First and foremost, I'm quite surprised why there was no invitation sent today to the Serbian embassy to participate in this hearing. But what is even more puzzling is how or why this exchange of view deemed necessary after the last week's full-fledged plenary debate about the exactly same topic. Even some speeches were similar. And the resolution that will come soon, I mean next plenary session. And I'm afraid that the real reason behind is not just because of the fondness of someone towards repetitio est mater studiorum, but rather it is an additional way to exert political pressure on the Commission and on the External Action Service by the exactly same political groups who organized last week's plenary debate. And Serbia was always open and ready for dialogue. Therefore, I think it was a mistake not to invite, in line with the basic principles of fair and loyal cooperation, a representative of Serbia, the Embassy of Serbia. After all, the final results are already out, so I think it would be highly appropriate to have someone really concerned from Serbia here with us today, because this is not helping the development of mutual trust between our institutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Andor. So, back to our two representatives of the Commission and the European External Action Service who were invited. Who would like to begin? Mr. Markovits?
Chair, thank you very much. Thank you for all your comments and questions. I truly believe that this discussion is really helpful, and it is some sort of a follow-up or additional clarification of the discussion that has already happened in the plenum. I will try to be within the time and try to answer to some of your questions and comments. First of all, as the EAS, we are really trying to address all the concerns as regards Serbia, and especially in a way that will benefit all the citizens of Serbia. It is part of our prerogative that we have to the enlargement process, but also to the region as such. And Serbia is a very important country and a factor of stability or destability in the region. Therefore, we have a special attention on that. For the time being, we are absolutely observing what was happening. We are following. We have our delegation on the ground, which is daily reporting, and that has been also involved in the elections and the post-election period in passing the messages, which were extremely important. Passing the messages to first of all to the people of Serbia, to the opposition, but also to the authorities. But now we, as has already been mentioned, we first need to have the official OAC ODIHR report, which will come up soon. and it is not being anyhow influenced or delayed, because it usually takes a couple of months before the ODIHR issues a final report. After that, we will continue with our calls on, first of all, addressing the alleged irregularities, and especially the recommendation from ODIHR from the previous elections. And I have already mentioned that we have received indications from Serbian authorities that they are willing in looking into all the recommendations, especially the integrity part. The second thing is, constantly and on any occasions, we are stressing the importance of the fundamentals: rule of law, freedom of expression, and media freedom. This is the media freedom is a concern that we all share, and we never miss opportunity to raise this. The second thing is, more concrete actions can only be followed up once the authorities will be formed, once the new government will be formed in Serbia. And believe me, we will continue with our dialogue to address all the necessary and important reforms. The second thing is on many of the irregularities, and I'd like to mention especially the case that the Honorable Moretti mentioned. We are looking into the case. We have followed it, but I have to say that it's very important to have full clarity of all the facts. There has been a lot of misinformation and media manipulation around the elections and after-election period. Some of them fabricated in the region, in Serbia, in neighboring countries, some of them also coming from outside. So it's very difficult to give clear judgments before we have all the facts cleared. And that goes very much also for the case of the representative of the Republican Party, Mr. Sandulovic. Progress, it has been mentioned, I have mentioned the progress on contested areas. It has referred to the dialogue, and I mainly refer to the license plates and to the commercial agreement between Kerts and Elektrosever on the energy roadmaps. These are both very important points for the normalization of the relations between the two. Unfortunately, I have to admit that the situation in the north of Kosovo is not improving, which is accumulating quite a lot of tensions from both sides, from both parties. This is something that is dealt, first of all, by High Representative and EUSR Lajčák, but also by the Council. And we have regular PSC discussions on what more to do. You know that the EU has issued two statements, one from the 3rd of June and one on the 19th of September, and introduced measures against Kosovo because of the de-escalation. This still stands. The discussion is still ongoing. The EAS is ready to gradually release the measures, but all the member states need to be very well convinced. And if you follow the conditions and what is happening in the north of Kosovo, the security situation has not improved significantly. I'm not trying to, by this, I'm not trying to praise anybody, but I just like to objectively express what is the consideration. Independent investigation, yes, of course, we will absolutely support it, and we are looking into possibilities how to facilitate it, if in considering the EU instruments, if there will be irregularity confirmed by this kind of investigation. Of course, the repetition is one of the options, but there could also be some other recommendation and options. It depends on the experts which will cooperate in this kind of investigations. And yes, we have reacted on the attacks on the observers locally with the delegation, but we will also continue doing it publicly if and when necessary. And yes, I can only recall and repeat that the concerns over the media landscape in Serbia. This is also our common concern, and it has been addressed in the enlargement, the progress report. But it is absolutely paramount to continue working on that and see how better we can enforce the civil society and especially the free media in Serbia. You know that there are a couple of concrete things that needs to be addressed, among them IRM and the national frequency. But these are all the things that we have many times, together with the Commission, communicated to Serbia, and we will also continue doing that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, honourable members, for the exchanges of this afternoon. I think it's a timely debate on the underlining the importance that we as the European institutions accord to political developments in Serbia, and also I take it as a signal of support for the country's EU accession perspective. I would want to react to some of the points made during the debate and not repeat what Mr. Markovets has mentioned, but I do want to start by saying on the Serbian institutions. So, in many ways, what we see is that the legal and institutional framework is in place in Serbia to address these problems that have been identified in the preliminary report of OSCE ODIHR. And I would also add that it is so important that Serbia will own the follow-up to the problems that have been observed. Now, we are still, as Mr. Markovets has mentioned, we are still waiting for the final OSCE ODIHR report and the recommendations for future elections. But we will, of course, when that report comes, we will encourage Serbia to implement those as quickly as possible, as soon as possible, and of course, well in advance of the next elections. There was a comment on the rule of law and how seriously we take it. I just want to underline it's at the core of the accession process. The revised enlargement methodology means that it is the pace of accession which is determined by progress when it comes to respect of the fundamentals. So I can only underline how central this issue is. I do want to mention that we have included in our proposal for a reform and growth facility for the Western Balkans, we have included the fundamentals as a condition for this work, for disbursements that we hope will now be approved by the budget authority. So, central to what we are trying to achieve in Serbia. On the media, so I did mention some progress that was made. I also mentioned the media bias. When you look at the package of laws which was adopted in October, the law on public information and media, the law on electronic media, it was 2 steps forward, not 4 steps forward that we wanted to see. In reality, what we saw, because I was extremely directly involved with all of the negotiations on trying to encourage Serbia to make sure that these draft laws were brought in line with the acquis and European standards before adoption, what we saw was that the Serbs ran out of time before they suspended Parliament for these elections. So if you are talking about the instability caused by the calling of snap elections, this was one of the unfortunate impacts. Still, I do want to stress that these laws represent progress. They represent progress overall. It will take time for implementation to be felt, but not only do they represent progress overall, but they represent progress in terms of actually giving the REM some of the tools with which it can impose itself on the media landscape if it chooses to do so. That is where we are. We need to test that in the coming period. We need to not prejudge this, but we need to test what happens in reality. Now, on the follow-up to the joint statements, I think Mr. Markovets has been very clear. We are in contact with the Serbian authorities in Belgrade. We've had discussions in Brussels as well. There is a dialogue ongoing. I see readiness to respond to some of the criticisms of the OSCE ODIHR preliminary report. We see that it's been expressed in writing to the ODIHR. We need to then, as I've mentioned, wait for the final report and ensure that the follow-up is extremely clear. This is in Serbia's interest. It's in our interest. It's in the accession perspective interest. And Serbia and our relationship with Serbia is of strategic interest to the European Union, of course. Now, perhaps the last thing I want to mention is, of course, that the EU is, or remain, Serbia's main political and economic partner. Even with these obvious challenges, Our view is that we need to continue engaging with Serbia robustly on all these issues that we have discussed this afternoon, and we need to do so because we wish to support the country on its EU path. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Miller. Thank you, Mr. Markovets. Are there any other comments from your side? If that is not the case, then thank you, gentlemen, for attending this session. Mr. Markovets will stay here for the next agenda point. Good to see you.
Thank you.
So, we're okay in time, so we can continue with item number 13. Thomas Hagleitner